Hello and welcome back to UnHerd. I'm Florence Reed. Dora Moutot is joining me today. You might recognise her name from our magazine or her work previously at Vice. She found herself in very hot water not long ago after a TV debate with France's first transgender mayor. She is amongst the most outspoken gender-critical feminists in France today, a movement that has taken slightly longer to get going than it has here in the UK. And she's co-authored a new book, Transmania, with Marguerite Stern. Adverts for Transmania could be seen all around Paris in recent weeks as they geared up for publication, but the Paris City Hall has threatened to remove them. I wanted to talk to her about why. She joins me now.
Hi. Hello.
So tell me, what is it in your book, Transmania, that has caused such a scandal?
Actually, in Transmania, we're trying to explain to French people what is the transgender ideology. Because for now in France, people still believe that it's only like a small movement from a small community and that we should respect it. And so people don't really understand what's going on. There hasn't been a discussion like in the UK or in the US. So it's really new here. And with Marguerite, we've been harassed for almost 4 years. We were kind of famous in feminist movements. And we just started to say, well, look, we think that being a woman is being an adult female. And suddenly the whole feminist movement was against us in France, saying that being a woman is a feeling. So we lost everything. I lost every contract because I had like a big Instagram account about female sexuality. I had contracts with a lot of different brands. They all decided to not renew the contract or to cut it. I couldn't work anymore, basically. Like, I couldn't do my Instagram account about female sexuality because transgenderists started to tell me that if I was talking about uterus, clitoris, female organs, I needed to talk about female penis. I was like, what's that about? I said no, and both we decided to never use the new language. So in France, they want us to say personne à vulve, which means people with vulva, and words like that to describe women, or people with menstruation when we talk about like periods and stuff. And because both of us, we were the only two visible women to say no, we decided to contact each other. And after a while, we decided that we had to write a book. Maybe in the UK or in the US, you're already there. Here, we are not. So that's why suddenly in France, it's like, whoa. They wake up, basically. Like, the book is waking up people. So it's kind of a hard wake up.
In England, at least, we have a kind of old tradition of second-wave feminists where often they were on the left side of politics and they have now come into battle with this new progressive queer movement over trans rights and trans identity. Why has France not got there? Why is it only now that they are starting to have this conversation? And why was your book such a shock to so many French people?
Because first of all, French people don't speak English. So they don't understand the debate in other countries. They don't read English. So they don't know, basically. Also because older French feminists, I think they're very scared to talk on this subject. Some of them only speak about like transgender children. That's the only thing in France that we can talk about. It's like, okay, puberty blockers, not so good. So some older feminists like Elisabeth Badinter, who's really one of the most famous, has spoken about like the fact that it's not okay to transition children, but she doesn't go further than that. And I don't know why the older one are not speaking. I think like the queer movement is so strong in France. Like, it's super big in institutions. The queer movement took the feminists over. So I don't really know why, but the situation is really bad, actually.
It's interesting in the English perspective on French culture because, of course, if you take kind of stereotypes, of which there are always some truth to them, us English are very prudish and buttoned up and private about our sexual lives, and the French are much more open and in some ways progressive, in other ways regressive about their views of men and women. So it seems interesting that France has become this place that has stuck out in time and has in one way maintained all of the kind of old school sexism of like the 50s with this hyper-progressive new queer theory added on top. It's an odd situation to be in.
Yeah, but I think there is some reasons. People like gender stereotype in France. Like gender stereotypes are much, much, much stronger than in the UK. Women have to look like women. Men have to look like men. It's still a bit like that. And so a lot of queer people feel really hurt by this French culture. So I think there is something going on there. The word female in France, like even for women, they think it's an insult. Like really, most women were like, what? No, I'm not a female. And I was like, yeah, I think you are. And they're really mad at this word because for them, it's an insult that men use to discredit women. Like you're just like an animal.
Yeah, reductionist, a kind of biological obsession with you are just your body parts and that is all you will ever be.
Yeah, that's how they understand it. But because they don't see the trans movement coming, they don't and even though we explain it, they don't really see why we're using this word again, because we need to use it right now to make a difference.
Do you think a lot of queer people in France are actually just suffering from the same forms of sexism that women in France are suffering from, and they are just responding to it in a different way, which is, look, I want to transcend the boundaries of gender because this gender binary of kind of old school male-female distinction just doesn't fit me, it doesn't make me feel good. Is there not an argument to say that really they've got the same impulses as your other feminist friends? It's just that perhaps they're, I don't know, expressing it in a different way.
Yeah, I think so. I think, for example, I think that if you're a feminine man in the UK, it's much easier because there's kind of like a dress fashion culture where you can be eccentric and stuff. In the UK, well, in France, you can't. Like, for example, if you're a man and you like a dress and you like colors and stuff, very fast men are going to tell you, well, you're just a little woman. And like, so I understand why, for example, men want to become women, because in some way it's maybe the only way to dress the way they want and stuff. So yeah, I think because we have very strong gender stereotype in France, it makes sense that people want to transition.
France has made a real effort to step out against that type of sexual binary. I suppose here where we hit a problem is that once you free yourself so much from that, you lose any ability to gather, to categorize, to have solidarity amongst groups because you are just homogenous. It's the French idea of everyone of égalité. But égalité sounds good in principle, but in practice it starts to look a bit like no one can actually decide who they are anymore.
Yeah, that's the problem. We have this idea of, in France, of universalism that's a bit like égalité. Is like everyone is on the same level. If you say something against that, or you're like from the far right suddenly, or they reject it super hard. Yeah, this idea is very strong in the government, very strong in institutions. So if you go back to just chromosomes and biology, well, there's difference between the two sex, and for some reason it's more and harder to say it in France.
It's an odd thing that feminists like you, who might have in previous decades been considered very much on the left, are now in some way united, strangely, in a horseshoe with people on the right.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of a strange experience. It's a very interesting one because you go from one side to another, and actually I'm more mad at the left in France who didn't let Marguerite and I speak in media. We tried to talk to like senators and like people from the government, and we really tried to get in touch and to try to explain them our point of view. They some of them we managed to get an appointment, but they hear it, but they don't want to have anything to do with us. They don't change anything. And so at some point we started to talk with everyone because the right wing started to be interested in what we had to say. So we decided it was a big decision to be like, okay, so the left and the center doesn't want to talk to us. So, okay, let's talk to people who want to hear what we have to say. And so we started to talk with them, and they've been actually very open-minded compared to the left. they actually did things. For example, Les Républicains, which is on the, I would say it's on the right, but more center. It's not like on the extreme right. They decided to write like a new law against puberty blockers, and it will be reviewed in May. So they're actually doing things on the transgender subject. I'm actually fine with what they're saying. But I don't agree with immigration, with their idea of around immigration or other subjects.
Do you think, though, that it might come to a point in France where there's so many women like you or Marguerite who have these frustrations that women previously who would have been voting for left-wing parties are now just going to move over and swing towards parties that have other things, like you mentioned, immigration policies, on which they have fundamental disagreements, but become a kind of sole issue voter?
I think it might, because it's not only transgenderism, it's also reproductive rights. For example, I don't know how to say in English, GPA.
Surrogacy and...
Yeah, surrogacy. So right now we have a debate on surrogacy because some French famous gay guys went to do the surrogacy in another country and started to post about it. And the left is saying nothing as well. I mean, they even encourage it. So I think, yes, there is a lot of women who are sick of like this surrogacy, this transgender thing. And because the left and the center are not really positioning themselves, they might start to vote on the right. I think it's a possibility, even though they don't agree on everything. But as a woman, I'm more scared of the left today than the right, because I don't think they will cut out abortion. In France, I don't see it coming. I don't think that's what they want. So I'm not really scared of that. I mean, for now, let's see. And the thing is that because I moved from the left to the right, I'm not scared. I will move again if I need to.
What do I prefer? Which evil do I prefer? A world in which no one knows what a woman is, or a world in which women are subjected for their biology? This is a strange decision to be having in 2024, when we are supposedly kind of in the fourth wave of feminism or wherever we're at now.
Yeah, it's actually so sad that we're there. But yeah, at the end, I think that I prefer to talk to people who actually are in reality. That's the final subject, the reality. And if I don't want to be related to people who, I mean, if they don't know who is a woman and who is a man, like how can I believe them on anything? Like, it's so basic. So if we're not on the same page about that, like I'm very worried about like all the rest, because it means they can lie. They can lie on everything. So I rather go with people who don't lie on basic things, and then we discuss things. And actually, I mean, I think for the right in France, it was not easy also to invite us and stuff, because Marguerite, she was an ex-femin, and she used to go in church naked, like with her boobs all over the place. She wrote stuff on her bodies against the church. Like she was really, I mean, for the right, which is some part is very Catholic, I think they looked at her a bit like, who are you? Why are
like,
you?
how are we in the same side right now? How has this happened?
Exactly. So,
yeah, they're probably as baffled as you are to be on the same team, as you call it.
Yeah. I think it's a bit absurd, but well, I would say, I mean, that's what the left wanted. So,
do you think that's actually what the left wants, is to unite feminists, radical feminists, with the right wing?
Yeah, that's what they want, because they start to actually call us, right-wing women, even before we got in touch with the right. So that's what that's their fantasy, and their fantasy is becoming real. So they keep calling us Nazis and all this crazy stuff. So I don't know.
They're kind of manifesting.
Yeah, they're very good at manifestation.
I want to know what's in the book that you think has caused the City Hall to try and take down the adverts. If you just think in the most critical way as you can about your own book, what is it that they are going to have a problem with that means that they actually don't want it being shown to Parisians?
So I think the problem is that in the book we're talking about the city hall, and we're talking about how
Okay, well that will get you in trouble with the city hall.
That's the problem. We're talking about the city hall and how much money they give to transgender NGOs in France, or public money, tax money. The thing is that in France, if you're transitioning, it's going to be taken in charge entirely by or NHS. It's kind of the same than NHS. And it can be for a man becoming a woman. Well, it can be like almost 100K.
And that's paid for by the government. That's covered.
That's covered. So
and the other way around, is there an option for women to transition into a man?
Yeah, and it's 40K. It's cheaper to become a man. So we're talking about that. Yeah, it's cheaper. It's still expensive, but not as expensive because
us girls, we're like quite luxurious creatures. It costs more to become one of these.
True, exactly. Because they have to do a full, remove the hair. So, and it's free. You can remove your hair like a laser for free if you're a man. You can do everything. You can do your face. You can remove your genital parts. You can have fake boobs. And it's all free. It's so interesting.
So if I wanted to get fake boobs, if I said, I feel desperately underconfident when I look in the mirror because of my lack of massive boobs, can I go into a French hospital and request that under a kind of body dysmorphia diagnosis?
No, you can, but you can say you're a man and you'll get your boobs removed. If you do plastic surgery, it won't be taken in charge, only in this transgender thing. And the funniest thing about that we're calling out in the book is that in France, since 2010, it's not like a psychiatric disease anymore. It has been taken out of the psychiatric disease book.
This is very interesting as well. I've always found this fascinating because this is the same in America, where it's being removed from the lists of mental illnesses that you can have because that's considered offensive or in some way denigrating to suggest that it is a mental illness, even though it requires treatment in the same way that you might require treatment if you had another mental disorder, because there are no physical ways to diagnose it. It has to be entirely through reporting. You have to self-report as someone who has these feelings. And so that is a real conundrum. How can it be both not a mental illness and something that you can be given government-supported treatment for?
If it's not a disease, if it's just like some kind of lifestyle, or if it's just because, I don't know, because the way they try to push it is just like it's a normal state of human. There is like woman, male, and trans. It's just another new category, and it's normal. So if it's normal, like, why should we pay for like all this operation? Why is it the taxpayers in France who have to pay for this when we teeth are not free? Like if you have a teeth problem, you have to pay. If you have eyes problem, you're gonna have to pay one part, and here you don't have to pay. That's strange.
Can you just explain to me how that works? How it is that we've got no funding coming for endometriosis care, but for loads of money coming down the pipe for people to have sex changes?
Yeah, that's kind of funny and a bit mysterious, but I think they're just so motivated. That's the difference between like women and transgender community, is that they're really good at doing lobbying, because women, for some reason, they're not as good as doing this kind of pushing laws and like making things moving fast.
Well, if you're an old school socialist kind of feminist talking about capitalism, you would say that's just because the systems by which money is accrued at the top levels are very well designed for men to achieve success in them, and not particularly well designed for women.
I don't think it's only that. After being for 4 years in this, like, after seeing the problem for 4 years, I think a lot of women have a difficulty in some ways to like, women have too much empathy for some reason. So they get drawn by their emotions and feelings. And I know it sounds like a masculine thing to do, to say, But I really believe it now because, and I think women are not as good as men to like actually, I don't know, make a community and push something together in the same direction and be firm about it and be hard about it. While men, they're very good at doing this politics thing, and they're really good at contacting the right people, and they're really good at getting funding. They're really, really good at that.
I find it funny that trans women are women is the saying that has really caught fire, that people feel they need to compel each other to mouth constantly. Trans men are men, you never really hear, and that's potentially because men don't really have any interest in showing kind of performative empathy to people in their group, so there's no need for them to come out and say trans men are men, whereas women, biological women, as you say, might actually be more predisposed to wanting to signal to each other that they are empathetic and, in a genuine sense, to actually reach out to these people and say, look, you're with us, you're on our team, in a way that men just don't care about. They're not lining up to embrace trans men into the group of biological men.
No, not at all. And yeah, that's one of the problem that I've seen. And also, women are so scared that that's the problem, because a lot of women agree. I would say even most women agree at the end of the day. But most women are so scared to lose everything. They're scared. They're actually scared of these men. And I think women have a different strategy when they're scared. And I think one of the strategy is kind of becoming friends with someone you kind of scared of in some way. So you keep it here instead of like, because what happens is when you say no to these people, they're very violent. So I think it's just like a woman's strategy to actually try to have them under their eye. So they're like, oh, okay, you're a woman. You're not, but so I see you stay here, you don't fight with me. So I think it's just very different strategy. And I think that women like us were gender critical all around the world. In some ways, maybe we have kind of more masculine personalities to actually say, hey, no, it's not working. We see you.
I was bemused, I remember when that first came about, that someone felt that they had to point out that they were beyond the binary. Most people I meet live outside of a very tight gender binary. That's the nature of the binary, is actually it's very few people who completely adhere to it.
I think almost no one, because even in your life, I mean, everyone is gender fluid in some way. So I think something that is really new for French people is that we're talking about autogynephilia and about like sexual paraphilia behind the fact that men, behind the transition of men. And I think that's kind of a hard discussion to have in France, because I feel that people are not very porn educated here, or they're very, very naive about like the desires of some men and about like deviant sexual desires. So I think that's also something that people have a hard time to understand and deal with. And we also, in the book, we talk also a lot about the work of Geneviève Gluck on Redux, about the link with pedophilia sometimes.
This is where it does get very controversial, because of course there's a long history, which I'm sure you'll acknowledge, of the right wing saying that being gay is just equitable to being a paedophile or a pervert, and that being an easy way to encourage more conservative, culturally conservative people to reject gay rights.
There's different reasons why men transition. It's not only autogynephilia. It's only one small part of one of the reasons that could push someone to transition. But we have to, why should we hide it? It's one of the reasons. And the link with, I don't know, mermaids, we had link with like a pedophilia lobby, also the WPATH. We had like some members in the Inuk Archive, which is a website with a bunch of like pedophilic stories. I mean, I understand that people are really scared because, yeah, some people at some point said that, like, yeah, some gay men are like children and stuff. But I mean, we're not talking about everyone. We're talking about like a small minority, and I think that it should be pointed out anyway.
The MeToo movement started with Harvey Weinstein in the US and then kind of traveled across to the UK and then through Europe. You've had the story of Gérard Depardieu recently in France, a very famous French actor who in many ways is the kind of Harvey Weinstein, you might say, of France, but also seems completely immovable, untoppable. How does that happen? How is it that France has somehow avoided Me Too but arrived at this destination of kind of queer theory that we've all arrived at in different Western nations?
I mean, in France, we have a lot of women transitioning into men. And it's actually, most trans people are actually women becoming men, actually. And when we hear the story of this woman, a lot of them actually got scared by the Me Too movement. I think the Me Too movement is a really great thing. But at the same time, a lot of women feel that being a woman is really terrible, that they're probably going to get raped, that they're going to be sexually harassed, and that like being a man might be the easiest thing to do. And because they have the opportunity, they're actually taking the opportunity to become men. So I kind of think that somehow the two things are linked.
That in some way the rise in awareness or fear-mongering around the idea of sexual assault and casual sexism in everyday life has, the downstream effect of that in France is that it's caused women to opt out of womanhood.
Yeah, I think it could be one of the reasons. But what I found also pretty interesting in France is that we have all this debate. For example, we had this actress, Judith Godrèche, who said that like she was dating a famous guy in the movie business when she was 16 to 20, something like that. And now she says that he abused her and stuff. Everyone is agreeing that like an older man should not go out with such a young woman, that there is something wrong in this. But at the same time, it seems totally normal to give puberty blockers to kids and to accept that a kid could change his sex, while we all agree that like a kid or a young woman or a young man should not have sex with an adult. So I think there is something a bit strange. There is two different dynamics. We want to protect younger children from sexual abuse, but at the same time, we're okay with like adults pushing kids to transition and to change their sex. So a child cannot decide of his sexual life, but he can decide which sex he might want to be. So
perhaps part of the reason for that acceleration on one side, on the idea that we need to quickly offer puberty blockers and transition to these young people, is because that's considered the kind of morally progressive thing to do, and to make up for the lack of zealousness about young people being abused in the film industry and young women being constantly harassed in the street in France, that what you do is you take the guilt from not doing something sooner about that, and you pile it all of that energy into the new thing. And that's, I think, maybe where we start getting mistakes made like that, which were raised in the Cass review in the UK here, which was that basically there was a lack of good evidence to suggest that puberty blockers were a safe thing to give young people on the NHS, which has in turn led to it being effectively recalled here. I don't know if that rings true to you, that there might be some overcompensation, particularly somewhere like France that has been so slow on the uptake of just second wave feminism, that now, okay, we failed on that one, so we can get it right this time.
Yeah, but failing again. So it's a non-stop fail for France, actually. But yeah, I think that there is something like that. I think that you might be right. I'm also thinking, I mean, I find it's very, very strange that France doesn't look at what's going on in the UK and what's going on in Sweden and stuff. Because why should we redo the same mistake while we already have testimonies from other countries who went there and understood their mistake and are trying to change things. But for some reason, I don't know, the French Ministry of Health is getting still in the wrong direction. In France, we have the Haute Autorité de la Santé. It's like, I don't know how to say it in English, but it's like a big institution. It's like, it decides of the rule in health. So it decides of the treatments and stuff. So they decided to do a group to talk about like transgenderism, trans identity, and how France should treat it. There is some NGOs who are fighting for the protection of children, who asked who's in the group, and the Haute Autorité de la Santé said you don't have to know. And so we said, yeah, we have to know. And so there have been a trial on this, just to know who's in the group. And even though the judge decided that, yeah, they have to give the names of the people in the group because we think it might be people who are gender affirmative, like psychiatrists and this kind of people, they still refuse. It's been months and months that we're trying to know, and they refuse to give the names.
I worry, I suppose, for the future of civility in places like France and in England, that civil culture might actually start to break down because people no longer trust big institutions. They also don't trust each other because they are in some way self-censoring or in fear of their neighbours and what they might say and the power that they might hold. Not having access to books like yours also means that these things are driven underground and become more nefarious or more dangerous. I don't know. I struggle to think of a good situation in 10 years if the kind of government censorship and political takeover of the scientific realm continues at this pace.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. And I think it started with the COVID, like the treatment of the COVID has been really, really bad in France. They said one thing, the other week they said another thing. They did a lot of censorship, like a lot with these subjects. French people started to worry about about the fact that we maybe don't follow science, we only follow like politic ideology. And now with this transgender subject, I think people are starting to realize, and it's been amazing. Like the book has been censored, but it's been 2 weeks that it's first on French Amazon. It's the most sold book on Amazon in France, which means that people, they're trying to fight. They're actually voting by buying the book. They're saying, no, I need this information. I want to know. And even though different cities, because it's not only Paris, it's also Mairie de Lyon, who decided to take the advertisements down. So I think a lot of people are starting to understand that something is wrong and that actually the government is trying to hide one part of the story.
In an earlier life, you had a blog called La Gazette du Mauvais Goût. So tell me about that, because I want to know what the link is between someone who decided they were interested in things that were bad taste, mauvais goût, and how you've got here, because it feels like there is a link that in some way when you go to a dinner party full of well-meaning bourgeois people, it's very bad taste to bring any of this up.
Yeah, I was always interested in the idea of bad taste, but it was more on an aesthetic level because I was actually studying in the UK at Central St. Martin's. I came from a fashion background and I was interested in what was considered good taste, bad taste. And at the time, I was actually very interested in like people who had sexual paraphilia, people who were travestites, I started to really observe these people and I was interested in them on an aesthetic level. So I interviewed a lot of them, met a lot of them, and I think the transgender movement, I've seen it growing from this time to now. So at the beginning, I was seeing like Andrea Pejic, I think it was one of the first transgender model in fashion. And so I was going to these travestite parties in London. So I've seen the whole thing coming from like kind of a party scene, with like, yeah, BDSM scene, paraphilic scene, to suddenly they decided that they wanted to have laws, to have rights, to push their own feelings into politics for everyone. So I've been following it from aesthetics to politics. But at the beginning, when I actually know a lot of trans people, because I actually was kind of like, I would not say friends with them, but my blog was super followed by queer people in France. That's why they hate me so much. Because, yeah.
So you were like a traitor to them because you came up through that world.
So I used to know a lot of them who actually hate me today. I used to write about them.
There's a great tragedy about the kind of punk side of this queer space, which was about, you know, standing up against the establishment, attacking the idea of the man with a capital M, and creating a space for people where it wasn't about you have to say this, there's compelled speech and there are rules. It was against rules. It was anarchistic. It was call me whatever you want to call me because I don't care, because I just don't follow your bourgeois ideas of what it means to be a man or a woman. That to me feels still like a great impulse, one worth fostering and one that has created incredible art. It's one of my great disappointments is that something that began as a kind of punk rebellious movement against the establishment has turned into something that uses establishment systems to censor its enemies and to make itself the mainstream.
Exactly. For me, it was more, I was interested in them because they were very artistic. It was like an art scene, like a party scene. One of the person who actually is a visionary of all this gender thing is Martine Rothblatt. Martine Rothblatt is like, so it's a man who became a woman. He decided with a bunch of friends to write the first gender laws, to push gender identity in laws. And he was just a travestite at the beginning, and he was like this kind of man who just wanted to dress like a woman, and that's it. But I feel that, I don't know, a bunch of men started to, he's a lawyer, that's his thing and he gathered with other guys in laws, and I think they just decided to push it, and it worked.
It does feel, though, that French philosophy, the kind of deconstructionist school, and the Sartres, the Derridas, you know, all the way through to the Foucaults, are part of this story.
Yeah. In the book, we're talking about how, like, Americans, like Judith Butler, took the French postmodernist philosophy, and she took it further. The problem with French people is that they're very different from Americans. So we talk a lot to just say nothing. We just like to take ideas and la 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 la. And then you have the Americans being like, okay, we're taking the idea and boom, we're going to do surgeries, we're going to do this and that. And French are like, no, we're just like, we were at the cafe talking about stuff, you know. So
like this was just us like talking at 3 a.m. after a few drinks. This doesn't have to become law in 50 states.
Yeah, that's a bit of the problem. But there's a really good book in French called Le Sexe des Modernes. So he's a guy who decided to, Éric Marty, he analyzed all the postmodernist French theory. And he explained how Judith Butler decided to take it. And we have also this French person in France called Paul B. Preciado. She was in a couple with Virginie Despentes. Virginie Despentes is probably one of the most famous feminist writer of our time in France. And so her girlfriend, Paul B. Preciado, became a man. She or he, I don't know, wrote a book called Testo Junkie, I think. And then he wrote another book who came out, I think, 1 year ago called Dysphoria Mundi. So a dysphoric world. And it's really interesting because actually this person is obsessed by Foucault, and by the idea of, in French we call it régime de vérité. So it's like a truth system. So she's obsessed with this idea of Foucault that there is no truth, there is only truth systems, and that one truth system is as good as another truth system, and you just have to pick what's best to be in a world that would satisfy most people. And in her idea, the dysphoric world is the new world. She says that there's going to be a transmutation, and that the trans person is the person in which the transmutation comes through.
So this is a vector of change. The trans person is kind of offering this opportunity to move from one system to another system. They are like the bridge.
Yeah, of their truth. So yeah, and it's actually a very interesting book, even though I agree with absolutely nothing. But it's really good to get into the mindset of a intellectual trans person and in what she actually believes in.
Do you think intellectual trans people and intellectual trans activists will want to get into your mind by reading your book?
No, actually, she wrote like a whole thing in a Libération, calling us fascists. So I think in the article I can tell my book was not read by her. I don't believe it. Both of us have a lot of empathy for people who are actually who are really dysphoric, because some people are really dysphoric and they suffer. But we don't think that the solutions that are offered today are good enough.
Dora, merci beaucoup.
Merci.
Lots of good stuff from Dora there, particularly that section on how France converted its guilt in the failure of women in the second wave feminist movement and the MeToo moment from 2016 onwards into a kind of overzealousness about the trans issue. Speaks to a wider philosophical problem, I think, that the West is dealing with. How can Western cultures make up for their past failings that led to the suffering of so many without causing more suffering in turn? It's certainly a big question, but one worth pondering. Thanks for watching or listening. Do remember to subscribe, and we'll see you next time.